Richard Henry Lee, a delegate from Virginia, had introduced the resolution to adopt the Declaration of Independence in June of 1776. He was prophetic in his concluding remarks. "Why then, sir? Why do we longer delay? Why still deliberate? Let us this day give birth to an American republic. Let her arise not to devastate and to conquer, but to reestablish the reign of peace and law. The eyes of Europe are fixed upon us. She demands of us a living example of freedom that may exhibit a contrast in the felicity of the citizen to an ever-increasing tyranny which desolates her polluted shores. She invites us to prepare an asylum where the unhappy may find solace and the persecuted riposte. If we are not this day wanting in our duty, the names of the American legislatures of 1776 will be placed by posterity at the side of all those whose memory has been and ever will be dear to virtuous men and good citizens." Though the resolution was formally adopted July the 4th, it was not until July the 8th that 2 of the states authorized their delegates to sign. It was not until August 2nd that the signers met in Philadelphia to actually put their names to the declaration. William Ellery, a delegate from Rhode Island, was curious to see the signers' faces as they committed this supreme act of courage. He saw some men sign quickly, but in no face was he able to discern real fear. Stephen Hopkins, Ellery's colleague from Rhode Island, was a man past 60. As he signed with shaking pen, he declared, "My hand trembles, but my heart does not." Even before the list was published, the British marked down every member of Congress suspected of having put his name to treason. All of them were objects of vicious manhunts. Some were taken. Some, like Jefferson, had narrow escapes. All who had property and families near British strongholds suffered. Francis Lewis, a New York delegate, saw his home plundered and his estates in what is now Harlem completely destroyed by British soldiers. Mrs. Lewis was captured and treated with great brutality. Though she was later exchanged for 2 British prisoners through the efforts of Congress, she died from the effects of her abuse. William Floyd, another New York delegate, was able to escape with his wife and children across Long Island Sound to Connecticut, where they lived as refugees without income for 7 years. When they came home, they found a devastated ruin. Philip Livingstone, New York, had all his great holdings confiscated and his family driven out of their home. Livingstone died in 1778, still working in Congress for the cause. Lewis Morris, the 4th New York delegate, saw all his timber, crops, and livestock taken. For 7 years, he was also barred from his home and family. John Hart, Trenton, New Jersey, risked his life to return home to see his dying wife. Hessian soldiers rode after him, and he escaped into the woods. While his wife lay on her deathbed, the soldiers ruined his farm and wrecked his homestead. Hart, 65, slept in caves and woods as he was hunted across the countryside. When, at long last, emaciated by hardship, he was able to sneak home, he found his wife had already been buried, and his 13 children were taken away. He never saw them again. He died a broken man in 1779 without ever finding his family. Dr. John Witherspoon, signer, was president of the College of New Jersey, later called Princeton. The British occupied the town of Princeton and billeted troops in the college. They trampled and burned the finest college library in the country. Judge Richard Stockton, another New Jersey delegate signer, had rushed back to his estate in an effort to evacuate his wife and children. The family found refuge with friends, but a Tory sympathizer betrayed them. Judge Stockton was pulled from bed in the night and brutally beaten by the arresting soldiers. Thrown into a common jail, he was deliberately starved. Congress finally arranged for Stockton's parole, but his health was ruined. The judge was released, an invalid, when he could no longer harm the British cause. He returned home to find his estate looted and did not live to see the triumph of the Revolution. His family was forced to live off charity. Robert Morris, merchant prince of Philadelphia, delegate and signer, met Washington's appeals and pleas for money year after year. He made and raised arms and provisions which made it possible for Washington to cross the Delaware to Trenton. In the process, he lost 150 ships at sea, bleeding his own fortune and credit almost dry. George Clymer, Pennsylvania signer, escaped with his family from their home, but their property was completely destroyed by the British in the Germantown and Brandywine campaigns. Dr. Benjamin Rush, also from Pennsylvania, was forced to flee to Maryland. As a heroic surgeon in the Army, Rush had several narrow escapes. John Martin, a Tory in his views previous to the debate, lived in a strongly loyalist area of Pennsylvania. When he came out for independence, most of his neighbors and even some of his relatives ostracized him. He was a sensitive and troubled man, and many believe this action killed him. When he died in 1777, his last words to his tormentors were, "Tell them that they will live to see the hour when they shall acknowledge my signing of the Declaration to have been the most glorious service that I have ever rendered to my country." William Ellery, Rhode Island delegate, saw his property and home burned to the ground. Thomas Lynch, South Carolina delegate, he had his health broken from privation and exposures while serving as a company commander in the military. His doctors ordered him to seek a cure in the West Indies, and on the voyage, he and his young bride were drowned at sea. Edward Rutledge, Arthur Middleton, and Thomas Hayward Jr., the other three South Carolina signers, were taken by the British in the siege of Charleston. They were carried as prisoners of war to St. Augustine, Florida, where they were singled out for indignities. They were later exchanged at the end of the war, the British in the meantime having completely devastated their large land holdings and estates. Thomas Nelson, signer of Virginia, was at the front in command of the Virginia military forces. With British General Cornwallis in Yorktown, fire from 70 heavy American guns began to destroy Yorktown piece by piece. Lord Cornwallis and his staff moved their headquarters into Nelson's palatial home, while American cannonballs were making shambles of the rest of the town. The house of Governor Nelson remained untouched. Nelson turned in rage to the American gunners and asked, "Why do you spare my home?" They replied, "Sir, out of respect to you." Nelson cried, "Give me the cannon," and fired on his magnificent home himself, smashing it to bits. But Nelson's sacrifice was not quite over. He had raised $2 million for the revolutionary cause by pledging his own estates. When the loans came due, a newer peacetime Congress refused to honor them, and Nelson's property was forfeited. He never was reimbursed. He died impoverished a few years later at the age of 50. Of those 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, 9 died of wounds or hardships during the war. 5 were captured and imprisoned, in each case with brutal treatment. Several lost wives, sons, or entire families. One lost his 13 children. 2 wives were brutally treated. All were at one time or another the victims of manhunts and driven from their homes. 12 signers had their homes completely burned. 17 lost everything they owned. Yet, not one defected or went back on his pledged word. Their honor and the nation they sacrificed so much to create is blessedly still intact. And finally, there's New Jersey signer Abraham Clark. He gave 2 sons to the officer corps in the Revolutionary Army. They were captured and sent to that infamous British prison hulk afloat in New York Harbor, known as the Hell Ship Jersey, where 11,000 American captives were to die. The younger Clarks were treated with special brutality because of their father. One was put in solitary and given no food. With the end almost in sight, and with the war almost won, no one could have blamed Abraham Clark for acceding to the British request when they offered him his son's lives if he would recant and come out for the king and parliament. The utter despair in this man's heart, the anguish in his very soul, must reach to each one of us down through 230 years with his reply, "No,